Okay, in this tutorial, we are going to look at how we can change the state of an object on our stage based on the values of the variable. So in this case, we have our customer character right here, and we're going to look at how we can change the state, the picture that we're using based on the responses to the questions. So right now, when we look at our customer character, they're in this neutral state, or we have a picture that makes them look neutral. When we mouse over them, we can get a little message here saying the customer is interested in what we have to say. So if we start to get the questions wrong, though, what we want to do is we want to change the state so they look unhappy or they're not interested. And then if we start getting questions correct, we want to change the state so they look happy. So for example, if we answer a question and we get it wrong, we go back and you can see that we've now changed the state and they look like they're not interested. We've also changed the state of this message and we give them a different message to let them know what the state is. Okay, so we see this state when we get the questions wrong. So let's start answering them correctly, and we'll see what the happy state looks like. So now we brought them back to neutral, and if we continue to answer questions correctly, you see that he now changes to a happy state, and we've also changed the comments down here to reflect that happy state. Okay, so now that we see how this works, let's go behind the scenes and see how we set this up in Storyline. So here we are in our Storyline project file. So let's take a look at this and how we set it up. So when we click on the object on our stage, in this case our character here, we go down the timeline and we click on states, and you can see the different states of the characters. So we have a normal state, we have happy, we have unhappy, and we have neutral. And this would be the same for buttons. Anything that is interactive in Storyline, it'll have different states. So you can change the look from one state to another. You can also select what the initial state is that the participants will see. So in this case, I've got it set to neutral. So by default, they're going to see this look. But you could drop this down and you could select any of these. It'll just set whatever that initial state is that the participant will see when they see that object. So we've looked at the different states. So let's look at how we create those states. So Storyline lets you, it has a bunch of already pre-made states that you can use for buttons, for objects, but you can also create custom states. And that's what we did in this case by creating these happy, unhappy, and neutral states. And the way I did that was I selected Edit States. And then one of the options here is New State. And so you have a drop down of sort of the built-in ones that Storyline already has, like hover, down, visited, selected, and disabled, and then you have some drag and drop ones. But you can also create a new state here by just typing. And this is what I did. So type the name and then select add, and that will add that state there. Once that state's been added, you can then add the image that you would like to add on that. Okay, so we've looked at states and how to set those up. So let's look at how we create the variable that will control those states. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my variable manager, select that. You can see that I already have a variable here that's called CSAT. This is actually the variable that we're using to control those states in the project. So what I did is I went here to create a new variable, selected that, and then you type the name of the variable. You always want to use a descriptive name when you're creating your variables, so it helps you identify what they're doing and what values they're storing. So then the type of variable, in Storyline you have 3 different types of variables. You have a true false variable that will hold either a true value or false value. You have a text variable that will hold a text string. And then we have the number variable, which is the one we want to use in this case, and this is going to hold a numerical value. So we select that. And so for default value, you can either have it select a random number if you're trying to generate a random number. In this case, we want value, and we want it to be, in this case, we want it to be set to 50. Because the idea of this variable, it's for CSAT, which stands for customer satisfaction. And the idea being that the customer is, or the participant in the class is going to be asked a number of questions. And the customer is going to start out neutral. And if the participant answers the questions correctly, then we're going to increase the value of this variable each time they answer it correctly. And we're going to check this value each time to see what the state of the character is. So if this is around 50, they're neutral. If it gets above 50, then the customer is we're going to change the state and it's going to be a happy customer. If it gets below 50, then we're getting questions wrong. And so we're going to change the state to unhappy. So that is how we set the variable up and how it's working in here. This thing it's already created. Okay, so we've set the variable up. So we've got our states. We've got the variable that is holding the value, and the states are going to use to change. Now we have to set the triggers up to connect the two. So we've looked at states, and we've looked at creating the variable that is going to be used to store the value that will change states. So now let's look at adding the triggers that are going to connect the two. So if we look at our timeline, we've got this, which is character 1. And then we've got some buttons. And as we click on the objects on our timeline, you can see it highlights those items on the timeline. So when we select character 1 over here, we can see the triggers that are associated with that object on the timeline. So in this case, you see that when we click on this trigger, let's double click it and you can see what's going on with it. So you can see that the action is change state of. So when you create a new trigger, you have a number of different triggers or different actions that you can choose from. So you can see all these different ones. But the one we're choosing is change state of. And then we're saying what object on our stage that we want to affect. So in this case, it's character 1. As you move over the different objects, you can see that Storyline highlights them with a red outline so you can tell what you're selecting. And the state, we drop that down and we can choose our custom states that we created. So I'm selecting happy. It also gives you the options to choose from the built-in states that Storyline already has. And we're going to say when this is going to happen. So this is going to happen when the timeline starts. We also have some other options. So you can choose from a number of different options, but we're going to choose timeline starts. And once again, we say character 1. And then we have the condition. So this is only going to happen when this condition is met. So what we have here is we're saying the variable CSAT is greater than or equal to 55. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll create one from scratch just so you can see how we create it from scratch, but that's just sort of gives you an overview of what these triggers look like. So we have a number of different triggers to trigger the different states depending on what the value is of the variable. So when the timeline starts, when they first come to this slide and the timeline starts here, it's first going to check CSAT, the variable CSAT, and it's going to determine if it's greater than or equal to 55, and then depending on what that value is, it will then change the state to whatever we define here. So in this case, we're changing the state to happy when it's between these values. We also have another one here saying that we're going to change the state of the character 1 to unhappy when the timeline starts if the value is less than 45. So then it will be unhappy, so they'll look like that. And then we have another one here, which is the last one, change the state to neutral when the timeline starts if CSAT is between 45 and 54. So we're saying they're neutral. If they get below 45, they're unhappy. If they get above 54, they're happy. Okay, and then we also have another trigger here, and what this is saying is this is just saying show the layer CSAT view when user hovers mouse over it. So when you hover the mouse over and it tells you the little message, it's actually pulling up this layer right here, and you see the message right there. And these are also controlled by states. You can see that we have our normal message, our happy message, our neutral, and our unhappy. So if we were wanting to create a new trigger for an object on our stage, we would select that object, in this case the character, and we would go up to create a new trigger. And so the action is already set to a change state of, so just make sure that's selected. An object, we go down to character 1, we're selecting happy, and we're saying when this is going to happen, when the timeline starts. And the object is on character 1. And now for the condition. So now we need to add a condition here. So we're going to select the plus button. And we're now going to choose that. So what we're doing is we're selecting variable. And here's our if statement. I'm going to drop this down. And so we're saying if CSAT, so it gives us all of our variables that we have. So I'm selecting the CSAT variable. And then we have our operator. So we can drop this down. And we have our less than, greater than, less than or equal to. So in this case, we selected greater than or equal to. And then you've got value, variable. And so what we're doing is we're selecting value because we've already selected the variable here. So we just want to say when the value is greater than or equal to, in this case, we selected 55. And then you would hit OK. And so that's how we created this trigger right here that affects character 1 and changes the states down here based on the value of the CSAT variable, which we created up here in our variable manager. Okay, so that's how we create custom states, and then how we create a variable to store the value that will affect the custom states, and then how we set up the trigger that will connect the trigger to the states and make it change based on the value of the variable. All right, I hope this has helped.